The coordinates Percy Fawcett gave for his last camp were false, and the falseness was deliberate. He called the place Dead Horse Camp, wrote its position into a letter home in May of 1925, and then, quietly, made sure the numbers pointed somewhere he was not. He did this often. Through his years mapping the borderlands of Bolivia and Brazil for the Royal Geographical Society, Fawcett kept his real roots to himself, feeding rivals wrong bearings, guarding his notebooks. A cartographer whose whole profession was precision, choosing, again and again, to be imprecise on purpose. The letter from Dead Horse Camp is the last thing anyone reliably heard from him. He was 57. With him were his son Jack, 21, and Jack's friend Raleigh Ramel. The three walked north into the Mato Grosso, into the green, and none of them ever walked back out. What I want to sit with is not the disappearance itself. Men vanished in that country all the time. Fever, snakebite, arrows, hunger, the ordinary arithmetic of the jungle. What I want to sit with is the instruction he left behind, the one he was very careful to make public. If we do not return, Fawcett said, no one should come looking, no rescue party. He wrote it, repeated it, pressed it on the Royal Geographical Society. Do not risk other lives searching for ours. On its face, this reads as the plain selflessness of a man who understood his own odds, and most of the time, that is exactly how it reads to me. An old soldier walking into danger with his eyes open, unwilling to let others die completing a gamble that was his alone. It is a decent explanation. It fits the man. It very nearly closes the door on the whole thing. Here is the consensus, and it is a reasonable one. Percy Fawcett was a gifted, obsessive explorer who believed the Amazon hid the ruins of an ancient city he had taken to calling Zid. He was wrong about the city, and that obsession is what killed him and two young men. The Amazon, science agreed for most of a century, could not have held a great civilization. Its soils were too poor, its rivers too punishing. Whatever peoples lived there lived thinly, in small mobile bands, never in the stone and population density Fawcett dreamed of. The land itself forbade it, so Z was a fantasy stitched from a mystic's temperament and a colonial-era rumour. Fawcett read spiritualist texts, carried a small stone idol he believed held psychic residue, spoke of hidden masters and lost races. A brilliant surveyor, yes, but one who had wandered past the edge of his own reason. I don't mock any of this. I've read enough of his later letters to know the mysticism was real and strange and sometimes frightening in its certainty. If you wanted a tidy account of why 3 men died in 1925, you already have one. The jungle punishes fools and dreamers alike, but there is a document, and it does not fit the tidy account. It is called Manuscript 512, written in 1753, and it sits today in the National Library in Rio de Janeiro. It is not a legend I am handing you. It is a real, catalogued physical paper, and Fawcett had read it closely. In it, a Portuguese expedition describes stumbling on the ruins of a dead city deep in the Brazilian interior. Broad stone streets, arches, fallen columns, a plaza with a pillar of black stone. Inscriptions in characters no one could read, cut into the buildings by hands that had been gone for centuries. For 200 years, scholars filed Manuscript 512 under fantasy, the fever dream of lost bandirantes, or an outright forgery. It described something the academic map of the Amazon said could not have existed, so it was quietly set aside. Not disproven, set aside. There is a difference between those, and it matters. Fawcett did not set it aside. He treated it as testimony. And here is the small, uncomfortable fact I keep turning over in my hands. The thing everyone agreed was impossible. A large, planned, permanent settlement in the deep Amazon is a thing we now know for certain existed. In the early 2000s, the archaeologist Michael Heckenberger, working in the upper Xingu alongside the Kuikuro people, mapped it. Not one city, but clusters of them, plazas, wide causeways aligned to the sky, bridges, moats, engineered ground, a network that once held tens of thousands of people. They are called the garden cities of the Xingu now, or Kuhikugu. They were not stone in the European sense, so they had softened back into the forest and become invisible to anyone not looking exactly right, but they were planned. They were dense. They were, by any honest measure, a civilization. I want to be precise here, because precision is the only thing keeping this honest. Heckenberger did not find Z. He found no columns, no inscriptions, nothing matching Manuscript 512 stone arches. What he found was the one thing the consensus swore the Amazon could never grow: complex, permanent urban society. So the foundation under the tidy explanation shifts. Fawcett was not chasing a geographically impossible dream. He was chasing something in the right family, in roughly the right place, decades before the science caught up to him. His central instinct, the one that got him mocked for a lifetime, turned out to be sound. Once you see that, you start noticing how many things around Fawcett refuse to lie flat. Take the stone idol. It was a small, dark figure, given to him by the novelist H. Rider Haggard, covered in a script Fawcett could not place, and which no expert he consulted could place either. He carried it everywhere. He had it examined at the British Museum. He wrote that a psychometrist holding it described a lost continent and a vanished people, easy to dismiss, and the psychic reading I do dismiss. But the object was real, and the unreadable writing carved across it was real too. Unreadable script. That phrase keeps recurring. It is in Manuscript 512, cut into the ruined arches. It is on Haggard's idol. It sits, decades apart, in two separate corners of the same man's obsession, and in both places the response of the experts was identical. We cannot read this, therefore set it aside. Then there is the matter of what Fawcett actually believed he was walking toward at the end. In his final years, the notes change. Z stops being merely a ruin to be photographed, and becomes, in his private writing, something living, a remnant people, still there, still guarding whatever had been left behind. This is where most biographers gently close the file, and I understand the impulse. A man writing about hidden living cities and secret guardians has, by ordinary standards, lost his grip, but hold the mockery one moment and ask a colder question. What would he have needed to see to write that? Because Fawcett was not, in his working life, a fantasist. He was a surveyor whose bearings the Royal Geographical Society trusted, a man decorated for the accuracy of his maps. The same discipline that made him reliable in the field is the discipline that makes his late certainty so difficult to simply wave away. Consider his son Jack, 21, strong, chosen precisely because Fawcett believed the final approach required someone he could trust absolutely and who shared his conviction whole. This was not a scientific survey with a full team and a paper trail. It was small, private, sealed, 3 men, 1 secret, and no witnesses. And consider the false coordinates again, now that we have come the long way around to them. A man who forbade his own rescue also made certain that even if someone defied him, they would begin in the wrong place. He did not merely accept that he might not return. He engineered against being followed at all. You can read that as paranoia. Rivals were real, other explorers wanted his route, secrecy was his lifelong habit. That reading holds, but paranoia guards against theft. What Fawcett built at the end guards against rescue, against anyone reaching the place he was reaching, even to save his life. Those are not the same fear. Let me slow down here, because this is the exact point where a careful person should get nervous about their own momentum. I have a pile of details that all lean the same direction. Leaning is not proving, so let me name plainly the ordinary explanation for each one and take it seriously. The false coordinates, standard tradecraft for a secretive explorer protecting a discovery from competitors. The no rescue order, the conscience of a man who did not want others dying for him, the mystic idol, the harmless eccentricity of a Victorian gentleman. Each explanation is reasonable. Each one, alone, I would accept without complaint. The living city writings, the drift of an aging mind under strain, dressing ambition up in spiritual language, the unreadable scripts, coincidence, or the wishful pattern hunting of a man who wanted mysteries to be real. Manuscript 512 itself, very possibly a genuine hoax, or an honest report of ruins that were simply never actually there. I can stand each of these up on its own, and each one holds its weight. That is exactly why the tidy account has survived 100 years. Any single anomaly, examined in isolation, dissolves into something ordinary. The problem is not any single one of them. The problem is the direction, because they do not point in random directions the way ordinary noise would. Fever and bad luck and eccentricity should scatter. These do not scatter. They all lean the same way, toward the possibility that Fawcett was closing on something the official map of the world had insisted was not there. And that raises a harder question than any conspiracy. Why did it take until the 21st century, nearly 80 years after Dead Horse Camp, for science to confirm the one thing Fawcett had staked his life on? Nobody hid Kuhikugu. It had been sitting in the Xingu the entire time. The honest answer is not that someone buried the truth. There was no committee, no order, no single hand pressing the evidence down. It is stranger than that, and to me more unsettling. The truth was not hidden, it was unthinkable, and a thing that cannot be thought does not need to be hidden. For most of the 20th century, the governing theory of the Amazon held that its environment could not support dense population, a place the archaeologist Betty Meggers famously called a counterfeit paradise, lush to the eye, barren to civilization. This was consensus, taught, defended, assumed. It shaped what researchers even went out looking for. And here is the quiet mechanism, the one that needs no conspirator at all. If everyone knows the Amazon cannot hold a city, then reports of cities are by definition errors. Manuscript 512 is a hoax. Fawcett is a crank. Native histories of great ancestral settlements are myth. The filing becomes automatic. No institution had to coordinate with any other. The rival explorers, the skeptical academics, The colonial administrators, the museums, they did not need to agree on a story. They only needed to share one assumption. And they did. The silence organized itself, grown out of a single idea that nobody thought to question. That is what I find hardest to shake. A conspiracy you can expose. You find the memo, the meeting, the name, but there was no memo here. There was only a frame so wide and so settled that everything failing to fit it slid, quietly and without malice, into the drawer marked impossible. And Fawcett fell into that same drawer. Not just his body, his testimony. The moment he wrote of living cities and guardians, he stopped being a decorated surveyor and became a cautionary tale. The very consensus that hid Kuhikugu from science is the consensus that turned Fawcett from witness into fool. So I have to ask the question I have been circling this whole time. If the frame was wrong about the existence of Amazonian cities, and we now know beyond argument that it was wrong, how much else that got filed under impossible was simply filed too soon? What else is sitting in that drawer? I keep returning, in the end, to the smallness of it. Not the grand theory, the small physical facts. A man who forbade his own rescue, a man who falsified the path to his last camp, a man who, at the very end, wrote as though he already knew what he would find waiting. You do not engineer against rescue for a ruin. You photograph a ruin. You bring people to it. You publish. You take the credit you spent your entire life chasing. Fawcett did the opposite. He arranged things so that whatever he reached, he would reach it alone, and no one could follow him in. There is one reading of that which I cannot fully talk myself out of, and I have tried hard. It is that he expected to find something he did not intend to bring back, not a stone to be catalogued, but a place or a people he had decided the world was not meant to reach. I want to be clear that I do not know this. I have no proof of it, and the mystic in Fawcett makes me distrust the whole shape of the thought. It may be nothing but the romance the story invites, the way every disappearance eventually grows a legend to fill in its own silence. But then I set it beside what we have actually confirmed, cities where science swore there were none, a consensus wrong enough to erase a civilization from the map for 80 years, a man who read the impossible correctly, decades early, and was mocked for it until the ground itself proved him right. And I find I can no longer be certain which parts of his account were madness, and which were only too early to be believed. The line I once drew between the reliable surveyor and the deluded mystic has stopped holding still. It moves every time the archaeology moves, and the archaeology is still moving. The three of them are still out there. Jack, Raleigh and the old man, somewhere beneath the canopy of the Mato Grosso, in ground that has swallowed more searchers since. Whatever they walked toward, they reached it, or they died reaching it, and they left no photograph, no marker, no last word past the false coordinates. We found the cities he believed in. We have not found him, and the space between those two facts, the confirmed civilization and the missing witness, is the exact space where I am left standing, holding a question I cannot close. He was right about the impossible thing. That much is settled now. What I do not know, what I may never know, is how far his rightness ran, where his sound instinct ended, and his stranger certainties began, and whether that border is where I have always assumed it is, or somewhere much deeper in the green than any of us have yet been willing to look. Fawcett left a door open on purpose. He built it out of false numbers and a forbidden rescue, and a silence he chose over the fame he had wanted his whole life. It has stood 100 years now, unopened, exactly where he left it. I have found it. I have not walked through.